The
Go
laughter
ahead,
echoed
don't
through
be
the
shy.
marble hall like
It's
a
your
challenge
move
that did
now.
not need
Take your
words.
time and make the
Come
best
on,
choice
the
you can.
billionaire said, leaning back in his leather chair, a smirk dancing on his lips. Let us see if the maid's daughter can handle a real game. His guests chuckled, glasses of wine catching the chandelier's reflection as they glanced toward the girl standing quietly by the doorway. She looked about 13 years old, wearing a hand-me-down dress a little too big for her thin frame. Her name was Ava. Her mother, Denise, was the maid who had served this house for 7 years, polishing every inch of it until it gleamed like pride she could not afford to show. Ava stepped forward slowly, unsure if the invitation was real or just another joke that rich people told when they wanted to remind someone of their place. The billionaire's name was Richard Hale, owner of Hale Enterprises, a man whose smile could freeze a room faster than winter air. Do you know how to play chess? He asked, his tone smooth but laced with amusement. A little, Ava said softly, her hands clasped in front of her. A little, he repeated, laughing. Then this will be entertaining. He gestured toward the grand oak table in the center of the living room, where an ornate chessboard sat ready, its pieces carved from ivory and obsidian. Guests gathered, intrigued by the spectacle of a billionaire playing against a maid's daughter. Ava's mother stood near the wall, a rag in her hand, her eyes wide with worry. Sir, please, Denise began, but Richard raised a finger without looking at her. It is just a game, he said. What harm can there be in that? Ava took a seat opposite him. The chair was so large her feet did not touch the floor. The board gleamed under the chandelier's light, each piece casting tiny shadows that looked alive. Richard made his first move lazily, sliding his pawn forward with a single finger. Your turn, he said, still smirking. Ava studied the board carefully before touching her piece. Her movements were delicate but precise, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Someone snickered in the back. She probably thinks the horse moves like in checkers, one man whispered. Richard chuckled again, but then paused when he saw Ava's move. It was defensive, cautious, but calculated. He responded quickly, expecting her to falter. She did not. Within minutes, her focus had drawn the air tight around them. The laughter faded. The ticking of the antique clock filled the silence. Richard looked up from the board and found her eyes fixed on his, steady and calm. For a brief second, he felt something he had not expected to feel in his own home: uncertainty. Ava moved another piece, trapping his bishop. Gasps whispered around the room. Richard cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Beginner's luck, he muttered. Ava said nothing. Her small fingers rested on the edge of the board, waiting for him to play again. Behind her, Denise stood frozen, torn between fear and pride. She knew this was no ordinary child's game. This was the moment her daughter had been underestimated, mocked, and tested, and yet, she did not flinch. Outside, rain tapped gently against the tall windows, a rhythm that seemed to count down the seconds of a balance about to shift. Richard leaned forward, no longer smiling. The room that once echoed with laughter now held only breath. And in that silence, a billionaire and a maid's daughter began a battle neither of them would ever forget. I am sorry for the confusion, Richard thought. He had been too sure of himself. Too sure that the young girl across from him, no matter how confident she seemed, could not possibly know the intricacies of chess that he had mastered over the years. But the way she played, her calm yet calculated moves, made him question that certainty. Her eyes were unwavering, focused only on the game, her expression an unreadable mask. The crowd that had gathered around the table, once full of laughter and snide comments, had gone silent. They were watching, waiting for her to make her next move. Ava reached out with deliberate care and moved her queen across the board, strategically positioning it for an attack. Richard's eyes narrowed. This was no longer just a game. It had become a test of his own pride. He could feel the weight of the room on his shoulders, the whispers now turning into murmurs of confusion. How was this child playing like she had years of experience? Richard glanced at his guests. His business partners, his friends, all of them were trying to mask their surprise. They had expected this to be a moment of light-hearted amusement, but instead, it had quickly turned into something else. Something they couldn't ignore. Checkmate, Ava said, her voice soft yet firm. Richard froze. His heart skipped a beat as he looked down at the board. There it was, the final move. Ava had trapped his king. He had lost. In that moment, the room felt colder, the silence even more pronounced. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his glass of whiskey, but his grip was unsteady. He couldn't believe it. A 13-year-old girl, the daughter of his maid, had just beaten him at a game that he had played all his life. He swallowed hard, trying to compose himself. You are very good," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Ava nodded, her eyes still focused on the board. "Thank you," she replied simply. The room remained silent for a few seconds, the tension palpable. Richard's mind raced. How had he not seen it? How had he not realized that this young girl, who he had so casually invited to play, was capable of this level of skill? He had underestimated her, and in doing so, he had made a fool of himself. His guests, though still stunned, began to murmur among themselves. Richard could feel the weight of their eyes on him, some filled with amusement, others with pity. His reputation as a shrewd businessman, a man who never lost, was now tainted by a child. Ava stood up from the table, pushing her chair back with quiet grace. "I should go," she said, her voice calm. "Thank you for the game." Richard stared at her, trying to hide the mix of embarrassment and respect that was rising inside him. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You are amazing. How long have you been playing chess?" Ava paused, then turned back to face him. "Since I was very little," she said. "My mother taught me." Richard looked over at Denise, who stood by the wall, her face flushed with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He had never truly seen her before. She had always been just the maid in his eyes, but now he was realizing that her daughter was something far beyond what he had ever expected. I need to learn more about you," Richard said, his voice a little softer now. Ava gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile, but there was no arrogance in it. "Maybe we can talk later," she said, then walked out of the room, leaving Richard and his guests behind in stunned silence. Outside, the rain had begun to pour harder, tapping against the windows with an almost rhythmic persistence. The storm outside matched the storm brewing inside Richard. He had been taught from a young age that power was everything. That money and status gave him control over any situation. But now, standing in the aftermath of a game of chess, he was beginning to see just how wrong he had been. Ava's victory wasn't just a loss for him in a game. It was a reminder that no one could truly be measured by their appearance or their social standing. The girl who had once been invisible to him, the one he had invited to entertain his guests as a joke, had just shattered his pride. And as he stood there, realizing the true lesson of the game, Richard knew that he would never look at his staff, or at people like Ava, the same way again. "I am sorry for underestimating you," Richard thought as he sat alone in his office, staring at the chessboard in front of him. The echoes of that game played again and again in his mind, each move Ava made sending a ripple of disbelief through him. The young girl had played like she had studied every single move, every possible outcome, and he had fallen victim to it. His pride, once unshakable, now felt fragile, like a wall made of glass. He had invited her to play as a joke, expecting nothing more than a moment of amusement. But in the end, he was the one who was laughed at. How could this have happened? He had spent years honing his skills, building an empire, and yet here she was, this child, completely dismantling him in a game that had seemed so simple. Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. His fingers ran through his hair as he walked over to the window, looking out at the pouring rain. The house, grand and imposing, suddenly felt empty, cold, and distant. Ava, the daughter of his maid, had done more than just win a game. She had shown him how wrong he had been. It was not about money, status, or power. It was about knowledge, skill, and heart. And those were things money could never buy. After the game, he had tried to shake off the feeling of being defeated, but it lingered. He couldn't stop thinking about Ava, how she had calmly moved each piece on the board, how she had outplayed him at every turn. She was so much more than a maid's daughter. There was something in her eyes that made Richard question everything he had ever believed about people like her. She was intelligent, capable, and deserving of respect. He had seen it now, even if it had taken losing to her to realize it. But it wasn't just her intellect that had shaken him. It was her grace, her composure under pressure, her quiet confidence that spoke volumes. In that moment, she had commanded the room, not with force or arrogance, but with her ability. Richard let out a long sigh and turned away from the window. He knew he had to make things right. He could not let this moment define him as the man who had belittled someone who was far greater than he had ever realized. He needed to offer her the respect she deserved, but more than that, he needed to change. The next morning, Richard found himself walking through the halls of his mansion, the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had never imagined that a simple game of chess could lead to such a profound shift in his perception of the world. But that was what had happened. Ava's victory had been more than just a personal triumph. It had been a wake-up call, a reminder that those who are often overlooked can be the ones who hold the greatest power. He had never paid much attention to his staff, to the people who served him. They were just there, performing their duties in the background. But now, he saw them differently. He saw them as individuals with lives, with talents, with untapped potential. And Ava had been the key to unlocking that realization. He stopped in front of the kitchen door, where he knew Denise, Ava's mother, would be preparing breakfast. He had avoided her for years, treating her with polite indifference. But now, he felt a pang of guilt. He had taken her for granted, just like he had taken Ava for granted. He knocked on the door. Softly, and when Denise looked up, she seemed surprised to see him standing there. "Yes, sir," she asked, her voice cautious. "I need to speak with you," Richard said, his voice unsteady. Denise nodded, wiping her hands on a towel before stepping aside to let him in. Richard entered the kitchen, the familiar smell of fresh coffee and pancakes filling the air. He looked at Denise, unsure of how to begin. "I was wrong," he said finally. "I treated you and your daughter like you were nothing more than employees. I didn't see the potential you both have. But after yesterday, after the game with Ava, I realized I'd been blind." Denise's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Sir," she asked, her voice soft. Richard took a deep breath. "Ava is a genius. And I have no right to have treated her, or you, the way I did. I want to make things right. I want to offer her the opportunities she deserves." Denise stood there for a moment, her expression unreadable. Richard felt a knot form in his stomach, wondering if she would accept his apology or if it was too late for that. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I knew Ava had something special, but I never expected anyone to see it." Richard nodded, his throat tight. "I see it now. And I want to help her, if she'll let me." Denise smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in years. "I will tell her," she said. Richard left the kitchen, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He knew this was just the beginning. He had a long way to go before he could make up for all the years of ignorance and prejudice. But he was determined to try. Ava had taught him a lesson he would never forget. "I am sorry for underestimating you," Richard thought as he sat in his private study, the sound of the rain against the window matching the unsettled feeling in his chest. He had spent the past few days reflecting on his interaction with Ava and the reality of what had unfolded. The night after their game of chess, his mind had raced. He had never imagined that a young girl, someone who he had considered nothing more than a maid's daughter, would turn out to be so much more. He had thought of her as just another member of the staff, someone whose life was limited to the boundaries of this house. But in a single game, Ava had completely changed his perspective, and Richard realized that he had been blind for far too long. Richard couldn't stop thinking about how easily he had dismissed people like Ava and her mother. He had looked down on them, assumed they were nothing more than figures in the background of his luxurious life, there to serve him and his guests. He had been so caught up in his wealth, his status, that he never took the time to really see the people who worked for him, the ones who lived in the shadows of his grand estate. He had to admit to himself that this wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a lesson he needed to learn. Richard took a deep breath and stood up from his desk. He had made a promise to himself, and to Ava, that he would change. He couldn't let this moment slip away as just a fleeting lesson. It was time to make amends. He walked down the grand hallway of his mansion, the marble floors echoing under his polished shoes. His steps were purposeful, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than the weight of power. He felt humbled. As he reached the kitchen, he found Denise, Ava's mother, busy preparing breakfast. She looked up when she heard him approach, her eyes widening slightly as if she was surprised to see him. "Sir, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice cautious. Richard hesitated, unsure of how to begin. He had so much to say, but the words didn't seem to come easily. Finally, he spoke. "Denise," he said, his voice steady but sincere, "I need to talk to you about something important." "It's about Ava." Denise set the knife down and wiped her hands on a towel. "What about her?" she asked, her expression guarded but curious. Richard took a deep breath. "I was wrong," he said. "I've been blind. I never realized how much potential she has. How much she could offer the world. I treated her like she was just a maid's daughter, someone who didn't matter. But after the game, I saw her for who she really is. She's brilliant, and I was foolish to ever doubt her." Denise stood still, her face unreadable. Richard continued, "I want to make it right. I want to help her. I know I can't undo the past, but I can offer her opportunities. I can offer her the future she deserves." Denise's eyes softened, but she said nothing for a long moment. Richard waited, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and hope. He knew he had hurt her, and he was uncertain how she would respond. Finally, Denise spoke. "Ava has always been special," she said quietly, her voice tinged with pride. "I've known that since she was little. But it's not easy for people like us to get ahead. We don't get the same chances as others." Richard nodded. He understood now. He had never seen it before, but now he did. "I know," he said. "And I want to change that. I want to help her. She deserves more than this life she's had to live. And you do too, Denise. You both deserve better." Denise looked at him for a long time, and then, to his surprise, she smiled, a small, but genuine smile. "Thank you," she said. "I never expected you to say that." Richard gave her a small smile in return. "I don't expect forgiveness right away. But I want to show you that I mean it." He paused, his voice growing softer. "I want to make things right, for both of you." Denise nodded slowly. "I'll tell Ava," she said. Richard watched as she walked over to the stove, her movements calm and measured. He could see the relief in her eyes, the weight lifting off her shoulders. He had done what he needed to do, and now it was time to wait. Richard turned to leave, but just before he reached the door, he paused and looked back at Denise. "And Denise," he said, his voice firm, "this house, this life I built, it's all yours too. You and Ava belong here just as much as anyone else. I want you both to feel that." Denise didn't say anything more, but the smile on her face was enough. Richard left the kitchen, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this was the right step. Ava had already changed him. Now, it was time to change the world around him. The next morning arrived gray and quiet, with a thin mist clinging to the tall hedges outside the mansion. The world felt slower somehow, as if even time itself was hesitating to move forward. Ava sat at the small wooden table in the servants' kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of cocoa. Her mother, Denise, stood at the counter, slicing apples for breakfast. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and toast. "He wants to help you," Denise said finally, breaking the silence. Ava looked up, surprised. "Who?" she asked, though deep down, she already knew. "Mr. Hale," her mother replied softly. "He came to me yesterday. Said he wanted to give you a chance, to help you go to a better school, maybe even study chess seriously." Ava's eyebrows furrowed. "Why now?" she asked. "Because he saw what you can do," Denise said, turning to face her daughter. "People change when they're humbled, Ava. Maybe he finally saw that talent doesn't depend on money. Ava took a small sip of cocoa, her eyes thoughtful. I didn't play to prove anything, Mama, she said quietly. I just wanted to play. Denise smiled faintly. That's exactly why you won. Before Ava could respond, the sound of polished shoes echoed down the hallway. Richard appeared in the doorway, holding a small black case in his hand. He looked different that morning, not as sharp and distant as before, but almost human. Good morning, he said gently. Denise nodded respectfully. Ava just looked at him, cautious but polite. I was hoping to see you before you left for school, Richard said. I have something for you. He placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside was a brand new chess set. The pieces gleamed in the morning light, mahogany and ivory, handcrafted with astonishing detail. This belonged to my father, Richard said. He taught me to play on this board when I was your age. I want you to have it. Ava's eyes widened. Sir, I can't take this, she said softly. It's too valuable. Richard shook his head. No, Ava. What you have is far more valuable. You have a gift that most people spend their lives searching for. Consider this a small token of respect. For a moment, the room fell silent. Denise looked at her daughter with quiet pride, tears glimmering in her eyes. Ava reached out slowly, her small fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the chessboard. Thank you, she said. Richard smiled. You earned it. He hesitated for a moment, then added, there's something else. A friend of mine runs an academy downtown, a private one for advanced students. I've spoken to him about you. He'd like to meet you and see your skill for himself. Ava's mouth fell open slightly. An academy, she repeated. For chess? For gifted students, Richard clarified. But yes, they have one of the best chess programs in the state. Denise blinked back tears. That's incredible, she said. Richard smiled gently. Ava deserves every opportunity. I can cover the costs, tuition, supplies, transportation. You don't need to worry about a thing. Ava stared at the chessboard again, her heart pounding. She had dreamed of learning more, of being around others who loved the game as much as she did, but she had never imagined it could actually happen. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly, her voice trembling slightly. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Because I was wrong, he said simply. And because people like you remind people like me that we still have a lot to learn. The sincerity in his tone softened something inside her. She nodded slowly. I'll go, she whispered. But only if Mama says it's okay. Denise smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. Of course, it's okay, she said. Richard exhaled, relieved. He stood there for a moment longer, watching the two of them, before he turned to leave. One more thing, he said, pausing in the doorway. When you're ready for your first real match, I'll be there. And this time, I won't underestimate you. Ava's lips curved into the smallest smile. You better not, she said softly. As Richard disappeared down the hallway, the rain outside began to lighten, thin streaks of sunlight breaking through the gray clouds. Ava looked at the chessboard again, her reflection faintly visible on the polished wood. Her heart swelled with something she couldn't quite describe, not pride exactly, but gratitude. She had been mocked, underestimated, and tested, but in the end, she had turned that moment into something real. Denise reached over and placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. You see, she whispered. Sometimes, the world needs to be reminded where true genius comes from. Ava nodded, her eyes still fixed on the board. It comes from anywhere, she said softly. Even from the maid's daughter. I am sorry for everything, Richard thought as he sat in his car, waiting for Ava to arrive. He had spent the past several weeks trying to make things right, doing everything he could to offer her the opportunities she deserved. Yet, as he watched the rain fall outside the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just the beginning. Ava had shown him what he had been blind to for so long, the power of potential, the greatness that existed beyond status and wealth. He had spent his life building an empire, but it wasn't until he met her that he realized true greatness wasn't measured by money, it was measured by character, talent, and heart. The clock on the dashboard ticked steadily, and Richard took a deep breath, still unsure what to expect from today. He had invited Ava to join him for a meeting with his business partners. They had already heard about her skills in chess and her acceptance into the prestigious academy, and Richard had arranged for her to meet with some of the top players in the country. He was hoping to offer her more than just a scholarship, he wanted her to have a chance at making a real name for herself. But the weight of everything that had happened between them was not lost on him. He had tried to show her respect, but he also knew that actions spoke louder than words. She would never forget how he had treated her mother, how he had underestimated her, and how he had dismissed both of them for years. It would take time to prove that he truly saw her for who she was, a genius. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, we're ready," said his assistant from the front seat. Richard glanced up at the building ahead, a towering structure of glass and steel. It was the headquarters of Hale Enterprises, the very place where he had spent most of his life building his empire. But today, it felt different. Today, it felt like a place where new possibilities could be born. Ava stepped out of the car, her bag slung over her shoulder, looking as confident as ever. She was no longer the shy girl who had sat across from him in the mansion, playing chess for the first time. She was a young woman now, ready to take on the world. Richard got out of the car and walked toward her, his heart pounding. "Ready?" he asked, offering her a smile. Ava nodded, her expression calm, but Richard could see the curiosity in her eyes. She was still unsure of him, still unsure of what he had to offer. "I've never been to a place like this before," Ava said, her voice steady. Richard chuckled softly. "It's not much different from your chessboard," he said. "A place where strategy and skill meet. And where you can make a real impact." As they entered the building, Richard felt the familiar rush of pride that came with walking through his company's halls. But this time, it wasn't his success that mattered, it was Ava's. They entered the conference room, where several of Richard's partners were already seated, along with the top chess players from the academy. The room went silent as Ava entered, her presence commanding attention. Richard stood by her side, proud and eager to see how she would handle herself. "This is Ava," Richard said to the group. "She's the one I've been telling you about. She's here today because she's earned it." The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Ava glanced around, her eyes taking in the room full of powerful people, all watching her. But she didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hands relaxed by her sides. She was here because she belonged. A man in a dark suit, a grandmaster from the academy, stood up and extended his hand. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. "You're an impressive young lady. Let's see if you can back up the hype." Ava smiled softly and shook his hand. "I don't need hype," she said, her voice calm. "Just a chance to play." The game began, and as Richard watched, he realized how far Ava had come. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore, she was playing for everyone who had ever been underestimated, for everyone who had been told they weren't good enough. She was playing for all the people like her, people who had talent but had to fight for every opportunity. Ava's moves were swift and precise, her mind calculating every possible outcome with an ease that stunned the room. Richard's partners, once skeptical, were now leaning in, watching every move with bated breath. This was no longer a game, it was a statement. When the game ended, it was clear who had won. The Grandmaster extended his hand to Ava, a look of respect in his eyes. "You're one of the best I've seen," he said. "You've got a future ahead of you, kid." Ava shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. As Richard watched the scene unfold, he felt a swell of pride for the girl who had completely transformed his understanding of what it meant to succeed. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about potential, about recognizing the brilliance in people who had been overlooked. Ava had taught him that. As they left the room, Richard put his hand on Ava's shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "I knew you would." Ava smiled, a quiet, genuine smile. "I did it," she said. "But I couldn't have done it without a chance. Richard smiled back. And you've earned more chances than you'll ever know. I can't believe this is happening, Richard thought, as he stood outside the large auditorium, watching Ava walk through the door. He had arranged for her to meet some of the top investors in the city, people who could offer her everything she needed to excel. But today wasn't just about business. Today was about showing the world, and showing himself, that Ava was more than just a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. She was a force to be reckoned with. As Ava stepped onto the stage, the bright lights of the auditorium flickered to life, casting a soft glow on her face. She looked confident, poised, and every inch the person Richard had come to admire. But more than that, she looked free. She had stepped into a world that had once seemed impossible for someone like her, and now, here she was, about to speak in front of an audience that included some of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the country. Richard couldn't help but feel a swell of pride in his chest as he watched her prepare. Ava had come so far, from the quiet girl in the corner to the powerful young woman who was about to take the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the host's voice echoed through the auditorium. Please welcome, Ava Williams. The crowd erupted in applause, but Ava, though visibly surprised, didn't let it affect her. She stepped forward with quiet grace, her gaze steady as she looked out at the room. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Thank you for having me today, she said, her voice clear and confident. I'm here to tell you about something that has changed my life, something that has given me a chance to do what I never thought was possible. She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Richard watched her carefully, his heart beating faster as she continued. I come from a background that most people would overlook, Ava said, her eyes scanning the room. I'm the daughter of a maid, and for a long time, I thought that meant I would never amount to anything. But I was wrong. The crowd fell silent as Ava spoke, her words carrying the weight of her journey. What I've learned is that opportunity is not determined by where you come from, but by what you do with what you have, she continued. I've been given an incredible chance to pursue my passion for chess, but it's more than just a game. It's about how we play the game of life. Richard stood at the back of the room, watching in awe as Ava continued to speak, her words flowing like a river, each one more powerful than the last. He had heard her speak before, but there was something different about her today. She wasn't just playing a game anymore. She was changing the rules. I know that many of you come from backgrounds where success is expected, where it's easy to assume that your place in the world is already defined, Ava said. But I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to change that, to write your own story. Richard felt a tear slip down his cheek as Ava's words struck him deep inside. He had spent his life trying to control everything, trying to prove that his worth was defined by his success. But in that moment, as he looked at Ava, he realized how wrong he had been. She had taught him that real success wasn't about wealth or status. It was about heart, determination, and the willingness to fight for what you believe in. I'm not here to tell you that life will always be easy, Ava continued, her voice steady but filled with conviction. But I'm here to tell you that it's worth fighting for. Every opportunity, every challenge, it's all a part of the game, and it's up to us how we play it. As she finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause once again. Richard stood there, overwhelmed by emotion, as he watched the people around him stand to their feet in admiration. Ava had done it. She had not only proven herself to the world, but she had also shown everyone in that room the true meaning of success. She had shown them that the real measure of a person wasn't in what they had, but in what they could become. Later that evening, Richard found himself standing outside the auditorium with Ava. The applause still echoed in his ears, but now, all he could focus on was the young woman standing next to him. You were amazing, he said, his voice filled with awe. Ava smiled, her eyes sparkling. I just told my story, she said, shrugging modestly. But it's a story worth telling. Richard nodded, his heart swelling with pride. You're going to change the world, Ava, he said. You already have. Ava smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. Maybe, she said softly. But I think the world's going to change me, too. I can't believe it's finally happening, Richard thought as he looked out at the bustling city skyline from his office window. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the buildings, and for the first time in a long time, Richard felt a sense of peace. Ava's journey had only just begun, but he knew that she was on the path to something extraordinary. The events of the past few months had changed him in ways he couldn't fully comprehend, but one thing was certain: he had found a new purpose in life. Ava had done that for him. She had shown him what true potential looked like, and how it could be buried in the most unexpected places. When he first met her, he had seen a quiet girl with no future beyond the walls of the mansion. But now, as he thought about her accomplishments, her acceptance into the prestigious academy, her victory over some of the best chess players in the world, and the way she had handled every challenge with grace and confidence, he realized how wrong he had been. Richard turned away from the window and walked back to his desk, his thoughts still racing. His mind kept going back to that moment when Ava had first played against him. He had been so sure of his victory, so certain that she would be no match for him. But when she had beaten him, he had felt something he had never felt before: humility. And it had stayed with him. He no longer cared about the power and wealth he had spent his life accumulating. What mattered now was the people he could help, the lives he could change. And Ava, with her talent and determination, was at the top of that list. The phone on his desk rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, recognizing the voice on the other end immediately. "Richard, it's time," the voice said, a mixture of excitement and urgency in it. "Are you ready?" Richard smiled. "I've been ready for a long time," he said, standing up from his chair. "Let's do this." He hung up the phone and grabbed his coat, heading for the elevator. It was time for the next step. He had promised Ava that he would always be there for her, that he would support her no matter what. And tonight, he was going to make good on that promise. Ava was about to speak at a major fundraiser for the Academy, an event that would bring together some of the most influential figures in the city. It was an opportunity for her to showcase her skills and gain the recognition she deserved. Richard knew this was just the beginning for her, but he also knew that her voice, her story, had the power to inspire others, to open doors for people who had been overlooked for far too long. As the elevator doors opened, Richard stepped into the lobby and saw Ava waiting for him. She was standing tall, her posture confident, her eyes focused. She looked ready. He could tell she was nervous, but she was hiding it well. She had always been like that, unshakable on the outside, but with a fire burning inside her that kept her moving forward, no matter the odds. "You're going to be amazing," Richard said, walking up to her. Ava turned to face him, giving him a small smile. "I hope so," she said. "But I'm just doing my part." Richard smiled back. "Your part is more than enough." The two of them walked into the ballroom together, where the event was being held. The room was filled with well-dressed guests, and the atmosphere was electric with excitement. Richard noticed the curious looks some of the attendees were giving Ava. She was, after all, a young girl from a modest background, but she had already earned a place among the elite. As they approached the stage, Richard gave her one last reassuring glance before she took her place at the podium. The room fell silent as Ava stepped up to speak, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. Ava stood tall, her hands steady on the microphone, and looked out at the audience. She had already made a name for herself in the world of chess, but this was different. This wasn't just about the game. This was about her journey, her story, and the message she had to share. "Good evening, everyone," Ava began, her voice clear and strong. "I stand before you today as someone who was told that I would never amount to anything. Someone who was overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't matter where you come from, or who you are. What matters is what you do with the opportunities you're given." Richard watched as Ava spoke, her words resonating with everyone in the room. She was no longer the quiet girl from the mansion, she was a young woman with a voice that could not be ignored. "I'm here because of the people who believed in me," Ava continued. "Because they saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. And I'm here to tell you that if you ever feel like you're not enough, just remember that someone out there is waiting to hear your story. Someone out there is waiting to see the potential in you." The room was silent as Ava finished speaking, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the applause began. Richard stood there, watching Ava as the room erupted in praise. She had done it. She had taken the stage and shown the world who she was, and in doing so, she had changed everything. For herself. And for everyone else who had ever been told they couldn't succeed. As the applause continued, Richard felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. This was only the beginning for Ava. And for him, this moment would be the start of something much bigger, something that would change the way people saw talent, potential, and opportunity. Ava had proven that anyone, no matter where they came from, could change the world. I can't believe this is happening, Richard thought as he stood in the grand lobby of the corporate office, watching the movers load boxes into the back of the moving truck. The decision had been made. The contracts were signed. And just like that, everything he had worked so hard for, everything he had built, was being given away. His empire was no longer his to command, but rather a catalyst for something bigger, something that would help Ava, something that would change her life forever. He had promised her a chance, and he was going to keep that promise. It was a bittersweet moment. Richard had built Hale Enterprises from the ground up, creating a legacy of wealth and influence. But he had also learned something far more important in the past few months: that legacy would mean nothing if he didn't use his power to lift others up, to create opportunities for those who had been overlooked. Ava had changed everything for him. And now, it was time to change everything for her. He had arranged for her to have a stake in the company, a position that would allow her to make decisions, to help shape the future of the business. This wasn't just about giving her a place at the table, it was about showing her that she could build her own empire, one of her own making, one that would reflect her unique talents and vision. "You sure about this?" his assistant, James, asked as he walked up beside Richard, the two of them watching the movers. Richard nodded, his expression resolute. "More than ever," he said. "Ava has earned everything that's coming to her." The doors of the elevator opened, and Ava stepped out, looking around at the busy office space with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Richard smiled, stepping forward to greet her. "Ready to take the first step?" he asked, his voice warm. Ava looked at him, still processing the magnitude of the moment. "I think so," she said softly. "It's all happening so fast." Richard chuckled, a deep, genuine laugh. "It's supposed to. You're not here to wait around. You're here to lead." Ava's eyes widened. "Lead?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "You've been given the tools, Ava. All you need to do now is use them," Richard replied, giving her a gentle push toward the heart of the office. "The future is yours to shape. And I'll be right here, helping you every step of the way." Ava took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She had always known she had the potential to do something great, but she never imagined it would happen like this. A year ago, she had been just a girl, playing chess in the shadows of a mansion. Now, she was standing at the forefront of something much bigger. She was about to step into a world she had once only dreamed of. As she walked through the office, the weight of the opportunity ahead of her sank in. But it wasn't a weight that would hold her back, it was a challenge that fueled her determination. She was ready. "So, what's the first step?" Ava asked, turning to Richard. He smiled. "We start with a meeting. You've got investors to meet, projects to review, and a future to shape." Richard led Ava into the boardroom, where a group of business professionals stood waiting. They were expecting someone important, but they hadn't expected Ava. She wasn't the polished CEO they were used to seeing. She was different, young, driven, and completely unpretentious. But that was exactly what made her special. As she entered the room, everyone turned to face her, their expressions a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Richard stood behind her, offering a quiet reassurance. "This is Ava Williams," he said, his voice filled with pride. "She's here to help us make history." The room was silent for a moment. The investors exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of the young girl standing in front of them. But Ava didn't wait for them to speak. She stepped forward, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm here because I believe in the future," she said, her voice steady and confident. "And I believe we can change the world if we use our resources to build something that lasts, something that helps. People like me, people who've been overlooked, underestimated, and given no real chance." The room was still, but the tension had shifted. The investors were no longer skeptical, they were listening. Ava's words had power. They had meaning. And in that moment, they knew they had to listen to her, not just because she was Richard's protégé, but because she was someone who could change everything. As the meeting began, Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. He had done it. He had given Ava the chance she deserved, and now, he was watching her rise to the occasion, just as he knew she would. The future was hers to create, and he was just a small part of it. As Ava spoke with the investors, her confidence growing with each word, Richard took a step back and watched with pride. This was what he had been working for all along, not just for his success, but for Ava's. And as the meeting continued, he realized that the future had never looked brighter. I was wrong, Richard thought as he watched Ava walk across the stage, her back straight and her eyes focused on the crowd before her. The auditorium was packed, a sea of faces all eager to hear what she had to say. Only a few months ago, he had thought he was giving her a chance, helping her, but now he realized that she had been the one teaching him all along. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her potential, her strength, and most of all, her ability to make a difference in the world. Ava had come a long way from the quiet girl who had sat across from him at the chessboard. She had gone from being a child hidden in the shadows of his mansion to a powerful voice in front of hundreds of people. As she stood there now, speaking to the crowd with the same quiet confidence she had shown every step of the way, Richard felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. This was not just about the game of chess anymore. This was about something much bigger. This was about changing lives, breaking barriers, and showing the world what could happen when you gave someone the chance they deserved. He had always thought success was about power, wealth, and control, but Ava had shown him that real success was about heart, about making a difference, and about never giving up. He watched as Ava paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the room, her voice steady. I'm standing here today because of the opportunities I've been given. But not just the opportunities. It's about the people who believed in me, who saw potential where others saw nothing. Richard's heart swelled as he listened to her words. She wasn't just talking about herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been overlooked, who had been told they couldn't succeed, who had been judged by their background rather than their ability. She was speaking for all the people like her, people who had the potential to change the world, but who had been kept in the dark, hidden from the opportunities that should have been theirs from the start. I come from a place where the odds were stacked against me, Ava continued, her voice rising with passion. But it's not about where you come from. It's about what you do with what you have. And it's about believing that anything is possible if you're willing to work for it. The room was silent as Ava spoke. Richard could see the audience was hanging on her every word, their eyes fixed on the young woman before them. She was changing minds, shifting perspectives, and making a statement. This was no longer about her success, this was about a movement, a shift in how people saw talent, how they saw people from backgrounds like hers. I want to give back, Ava said, her voice full of conviction. I want to create opportunities for others, just like the ones I've been given. And I want to make sure no one is ever told they can't achieve their dreams because of where they come from. The audience erupted into applause, but Ava didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady, her focus unwavering. Richard couldn't believe how much she had grown, how much she had accomplished. She had done it. She had taken everything that had been thrown at her and turned it into something beautiful, something powerful. Ava's words had the power to change the world. She had become a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Richard had given her a chance, but it was Ava who had taken that chance and run with it, who had proven to the world that nothing was impossible. As the applause continued, Richard's thoughts wandered back to the day when he had first met Ava, back to that moment when he had been so sure of his superiority, so sure that she was nothing more than a maid's daughter. He had been wrong. He had been blind to the brilliance sitting right in front of him. Now, as he watched her speak, as he saw the impact she was making, he knew that his life, his legacy, had been forever changed by her. This wasn't just about offering someone a chance. This was about recognizing greatness where others saw none, about lifting up the voices that had been silenced for far too long. Ava had done that. She had risen above, and now, she was reaching back to lift others with her. As the event drew to a close, Richard approached Ava backstage. She was surrounded by well-wishers, people eager to congratulate her on her speech, on her success. But when she saw him, she broke away from the crowd, her eyes meeting his. "You did it," he said, his voice full of admiration. Ava smiled, but there was no arrogance in her smile, only quiet satisfaction. "We did it," she corrected him softly. "You gave me a chance, and I took it. But now, it's time to give others that chance too." Richard felt a lump form in his throat. He had always thought he was the one giving chances, but Ava had shown him that the greatest gift you could give someone was the belief in their potential. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "You're going to change the world, Ava." She smiled again, a small, knowing smile. "I already am." "I never thought I would see the day," Richard thought as he sat in his office, looking out the large windows at the sprawling city below. It had been several months since Ava had joined Hale Enterprises, and what a transformation it had been not just for her, but for him as well. He had watched as she took on new challenges, led meetings, and became an inspiration to those around her. She was no longer just the young girl who had beaten him at chess. She was a force, a leader, someone who had found her place in the world. And he couldn't be prouder. But as he sat there, reflecting on how far they had both come, he realized that her journey was far from over. Ava had changed the way he saw the world, and now, he was determined to help her change the world as well. He stood up, walking to the window, his hands resting on the edge of the sill as he gazed out at the horizon. He had made the decision. It was time to take the next step, not just for him, but for Ava and everyone who had believed in her. He had spent years building his empire, but now he understood that the true legacy he wanted to leave behind wasn't about wealth or power. It was about giving others the chance to thrive, to rise above the limitations that society had placed on them. He had seen it firsthand with Ava. Her potential had been buried, overlooked, and underestimated, but now, she was shining. He wasn't going to let her be the only one. He wasn't going to sit idly by and watch while others like her struggled to find their place. He had the resources, the connections, and the influence. It was time to use them to help those who needed it most. The door to his office opened, and his assistant, James, walked in. "Sir, everything's ready for the meeting," James said, looking at him with a questioning expression. Richard nodded. "Let's go," he said, his voice filled with resolve. It was time to make his move. The meeting was at the Hale Enterprises headquarters, and this time, it wasn't just about business. Richard had arranged a gathering of investors, philanthropists, and leaders from across the city. His goal was clear: to launch a new initiative, one that would focus on providing scholarships, mentorship, and career opportunities for underprivileged youth. The program would give them the same chance Ava had been given, the same chance she had seized and used to change her life. As Richard entered the conference room, he was met by the faces of some of the most influential people in the city. But this time, he wasn't just the CEO of Hale Enterprises. He was a man with a mission, and he could see in their eyes that they understood it. Ava was already there, standing by the table, talking with some of the potential investors. She looked confident, as she always did now, but Richard could tell that there was still a sense of awe in her eyes. She had come so far, but she hadn't forgotten where she came from. Richard walked over to her, offering her a smile. "Are you ready?" he asked. Ava looked up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. "I think so," she said, her voice steady. "But it's a little overwhelming, isn't it?" Richard chuckled. "It is," he agreed. "But that's what makes it so important. This is bigger than any of us. This is about giving everyone the same chance to succeed." Ava nodded, looking out at the room full of people. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life fighting for a seat at the table. Now, I'm about to help others get their own seat." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've earned your seat, Ava. And now, you're helping others earn theirs." The meeting began, and Richard watched as Ava spoke, explaining the vision for the new initiative. She spoke with passion, with purpose, and with the kind of conviction that made everyone in the room listen. As she shared her own story, how she had been underestimated, how she had fought to get to where she was now, Richard saw the room shift. People who had once been skeptical were nodding, their expressions changing as they recognized the impact this program could have. The initiative wasn't just a charitable endeavor. It was a movement. A movement that would empower young people to break free from the constraints of their circumstances and build their own futures. Richard looked around the room and knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning. The room was buzzing with excitement as investors and philanthropists made their pledges, offering their support to the new initiative. Ava had done it again. She had turned a dream into a reality, and now, she was bringing others along with her. As the meeting concluded, Richard approached Ava, his heart swelling with pride. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Ava smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "We did it," she corrected him softly. "But I couldn't have done it without you." Richard nodded, his eyes brimming with emotion. "You're going to change the world, Ava," he said. Ava smiled again, a small, knowing smile. "I already am," she said softly, looking around at the room full of people who had once been strangers, but who were now part of her journey. She had proven that anyone, no matter where they came from, could rise above their circumstances and change the world. And she was just getting started. "I am proud of you," Richard thought as he watched Ava from the corner of the room, her eyes scanning the crowd as she spoke at the fundraising gala. This was more than just a charity event for Hale Enterprises, it was a celebration of the changes that had taken place, not just in the company, but in the way Richard viewed success, opportunity, and legacy. Ava had become the catalyst for that change, and he could not be more grateful. He had spent most of his life chasing the idea of power, wealth, and influence, thinking that those were the things that defined success. But as he stood in the room, listening to Ava speak so confidently, he knew he had been wrong. Success was about more than just what you had. It was about what you gave, what you contributed to the world around you. Ava's journey had been incredible, and it wasn't just because she was brilliant at chess or because she had managed to achieve things many thought were impossible for someone from her background. It was because she had remained humble, focused on helping others, and determined to make the world a better place. As Richard looked at her now, standing on the stage, he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the moment when Ava was no longer just a part of his company, she was a leader, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't achieve their dreams. The applause from the crowd died down as Ava finished her speech. Richard made his way through the room, his heart pounding with excitement. He had seen her grow from a quiet, cautious young girl into the confident, driven woman before him now. She had faced challenges that would have broken most people, yet she stood strong, a testament to what determination and belief in oneself could achieve. He reached Ava just as she stepped off the stage. She turned to him, her face lighting up with a smile. "You did it," Richard said, his voice filled with pride. "You truly did it." Ava looked at him, a humble smile playing on her lips. "We did it," she replied softly, her voice full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your help. But this is just the beginning, right?" Richard nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "This is just the beginning. You've proven what's possible when someone is given the chance they deserve. And now, we're going to make sure that others get the same chance." Ava's smile grew wider as she looked around the room. She had already achieved so much, but now, she could see that the real work was just starting. There were still so many more people to help, so many more lives to change. But as she looked at Richard, she realized that she wasn't alone in this mission. She had a partner, a mentor, and a friend who truly believed in her and in the power of opportunity. "Where do we start?" Ava asked, her voice filled with resolve. "We start by making sure that no one else has to fight the same battles we did to get here," Richard said. "We'll keep building this, Ava. We'll keep creating opportunities for young people who are just like you, who have the talent but need someone to believe in them." Ava nodded. "I'm ready," she said. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the weight of the moment. They had come so far, but there was still so much to do. Together, they would create a future where anyone, no matter their background, would have the opportunity to achieve their dreams. As they walked out of the gala together, the night air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the warmth inside. The city stretched out before them, full of possibilities, full of hope. Richard felt a surge of determination. He had spent so many years focused on himself, on his own success, but now he realized that the true measure of success wasn't in the things you acquired, it was in the lives you touched, the people you helped, and the legacy you left behind. And with Ava by his side, that legacy would be one that would change the world. "We're just getting started," Richard said quietly, more to himself than to Ava. "Just getting started," she agreed, her eyes shining with the same conviction that had driven her from the beginning. And in that moment, Richard knew that together, they would create a world where no one was held back by their circumstances, a world where everyone had the opportunity to rise and succeed, just like Ava. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape. As the years passed, Richard watched as the seeds they had planted together grew into something far greater than he had ever imagined. Ava was no longer just the young girl who had been underestimated, she had become a symbol of what was possible when people were given the opportunities they deserved. Her story had inspired thousands, and her work with the foundation they had started was making waves across the country. What had once started as a simple gesture of helping someone who had been overlooked was now a movement to change the way people saw talent, potential, and success. Richard couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this moment. He had once believed that success was defined by wealth, power, and influence. But he had learned that true success was measured by the difference you made in the world, by the lives you touched, and the opportunities you provided for others. Ava had taught him that. He had spent his entire life building a business empire, but it was only when he partnered with Ava that he realized what his true legacy could be. It wasn't about the buildings he owned, the deals he had made, or the money he had accumulated. It was about the lives he could change, the opportunities he could create, and the future he could help shape. And with Ava leading the way, he knew that this was only the beginning. Ava had become a mentor to young people all over the country. She was a role model to those who had been told they couldn't succeed because of where they came from, and she had shown them that no dream was too big to achieve. Through the foundation they had built, countless children were now able to pursue their passions, go to school, and receive the mentorship they needed to succeed. What Richard had once thought was just a way to give back had turned into something that was changing the fabric of society. He knew that Ava's impact would last long after they were both gone. It was a legacy that would continue to shape generations to come. One day, as Richard sat in his office, looking out at the same city skyline that had once been so full of promise, he received a call from Ava. "Richard," she said, her voice filled with excitement, "I think it's time we take things to the next level. We've built something amazing, but I want to see it spread beyond what we've ever imagined. I want to create a network of schools, of programs, across the country, where young people like me can learn, grow, and succeed. It's time we make this vision global." Richard smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Ava, you've always known how to turn a dream into reality," he said. "If anyone can do it, it's you." He knew this was her next big step, and he was more than ready to support her, just as he had from the very beginning. As Ava's vision began to take shape, Richard found himself more involved than ever, not as the leader of a company, but as an ally and partner in the fight for a better future. Together, they worked tirelessly to bring Ava's dream to life, creating schools, mentorship programs, and networks that empowered young people to follow their passions and break down the barriers that had once held them back. The years flew by, and the movement grew stronger. Ava's name became synonymous with hope, with change, with possibility. Richard, now an older man, watched as Ava took the helm, guiding the movement forward with grace, determination, and the same unwavering belief that had driven her all along. He knew that he had found not only a partner but a true friend in her. And as he looked back at everything they had accomplished, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. They had done it. Together, they had built something that would last, a legacy that would continue to inspire, uplift, and change the world for generations to come. Ava had proven that the greatest power in the world was not in wealth or status, but in the ability to give others the chance to succeed. And that was a lesson that Richard would carry with him for the rest of his life. As he sat in his favorite chair one evening, looking at the glowing skyline, Richard thought about the road they had traveled together. It had been a long journey, but it had been worth every step. Because in the end, it wasn't about the empire he had built, it was about the future he had helped create. And as he watched Ava, now leading the charge with her own vision, he knew that the world was in good hands. The future was brighter than he could have ever imagined, and it was all thanks to the young girl who had proven that anything was possible. He smiled, knowing that the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I am proud to present this inspiring Black story of transformation and triumph. In this powerful narrative, a young Black girl, once underestimated, rises to greatness and teaches the world the true meaning of success. As we follow her journey from a humble beginning to becoming a leading force in a global movement, this Black story proves that with the right opportunities and belief in oneself, anything is possible. The path from being overlooked to becoming a respected leader is not always easy, but in this Black story, perseverance, intelligence, and heart shine through, showing that true power lies in giving others the chance to succeed. This Black story not only highlights the incredible potential within underrepresented communities but also emphasizes the importance of mentorship and support. As this Black story unfolds, it illustrates the importance of breaking barriers, creating opportunities, and fighting for a better future for all. The legacy of this inspiring Black story will continue to impact generations to come, showing how one person's success can change the course of many lives and open doors that were once closed. Don't miss out on this unforgettable Black story of resilience, growth, and empowerment.